Good day everyone, I am Rian Caracas and I'm going to discuss the unique features of communication in an international business. In today's global world, working with people from different cultures is a common occurrence in a business setting. Your suppliers may be located halfway across the world, your partners may have just moved from another country, and your customer may speak a different language than you. In order for businesses to succeed in this global environment, it's important to know how to navigate cross-cultural communication. By implementing strategies to succeed in cross-cultural business endeavors while crossing hurdles, organizations can show their customer and stakeholders that they value their relationship. Intercultural and international businesses. Global business is more than trade between companies located in distinct countries. Indeed, the concept is already outdated. In short, business communication values clear, concise interaction that promotes efficiency and effectiveness. You may perceive your role as a business communicator within a specific city, business, or organization, but you need to be aware that your role crosses culture, language, values, and legal system and borders. Let's start with the intercultural communication. Intercultural communication is the sharing of understanding and meaning across cultures. Cultures involves beliefs, attitudes, values, and tradition that are shared by a group of people. When we say intercultural communication, it refers to the communication between people from two different cultures. Intercultural communication is a symbolic, interpretive, transactional, contextual process in which people from different cultures create shared meanings. Example of intercultural communication is an American and African share their views, a Chinese politician discuss with an American leader. And I've read in the article that the way we communicate with others and with ourselves ultimately determines the quality of our lives. Next is the intracultural communication. Communication with the same culture. Every business or organization has a culture, and within what may be considered a global culture, there are many subculture or co-cultures. For this term, note the intra as compared to the inter. Intracultural communication describe communication between at least two people who are from the same culture or have culturally similar backgrounds. So, for example, a conversation between two American citizens who both grow up on the farms of Georgia would be intracultural because they will essentially have the same background and cultural orientations. Next is the ethnocentrism. Is the tendency to view others' culture as inferior to one's own. When we say ethnocentrism, it also the term anthropologists use to describe the opinion that one's own way of life is natural or correct. Sa madaling salita, yung ethnocentrism, maaaring tingnan ng isang tao ang kanyang sariling kultura bilang tamang paraan ng pamumuhay. Example of ethnocentrism is Asian culture across all the countries of Asia. Throughout Asia, the way of eating is to use chopstick with every meal. These people may find it unnecessary to find that people in other societies, such as the American societies, eating using forks, spoon, knives. Since this country use chopsticks to eat every meal, they find it foolish to other cultures to not use utensils similar to chopsticks. However, they do accept the fact that they use different utensils for eating. Next is nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication can also as a barrier to cross-cultural communication. In many Western countries, eye contact is seen as a way to build trust and show honesty and integrity. When we say nonverbal communication, it is the transmission of messages or signals through a nonverbal platform such as eye contact, facial expression, gestures, postures, and body language. Let's move on to understand the importance of cultural sensitivity. Cultural sensitivity involves being respectful of other cultures, understanding and knowing about different cultures, and accepting the difference and similarities help from people to communicate more effectively and build meaningful relationships. It is important to understand cultural sensitivity because it allows us to effectively function in other cultures and can reduce cultural barriers between professional and their patients. So yun, mahalaga nga na magkaroon ng cultural sensitivity para maiwasan yung hindi pagkakaintindihan. The first step you need to do is do your research. Cultural awareness in business involves preparing and learning about the different culture with which your business interacts. It is important na malaman mo ang pagkakaiba-iba ng iyong mga employee or customer so that they know to show everyone the respect that they deserve regardless of whether they are different cultures or not. Reduce communication barriers. One of the biggest barriers to cross-cultural business dealing is communication. Your business stakeholders may speak a different language or dialect or use hyperlocation phrases with which you aren't familiar. Even though English is used as the international language of business, people have different levels of influency. Next is review workplace etiquette. Take time to figure out the workplace etiquette norms of your business stakeholders. Our cultures play a big role in how we use body language to communicate at work. So yun nga sinasabi dito na may malaking papel kung paano natin ginagamit ang body language in communicating. One of the example is sa Amerika, ang pakikipag-ugnayan sa mata sa panahon ng transaksyon sa negosyo ay nagpapakita ng katapatan at effort to establish connection. Samantalang sa Middle East naman, making sustainable eye contact with a person of the opposite gender can be seen as inappropriate. Next, show respect and empathy. The key goal of being culturally sensitive is to show other respect. Make an effort to learn about the cultural customs your employees, customer, and partners hold dear. Show them you value your relationship with them by sharing their custom. For example, if a Muslim colleague is celebrating Eid, a major religious holiday, bring a treat to enjoy together. Small acts of kindness na maaaring makatulong sa pagpapakita sa iba ng kahalagahan ng pagiging sensitibo sa iba't ibang kultura. Physical barriers to communication. Physical barriers of communication happen as a result of the surroundings in which the communication takes place. Physical barriers such as geography or office setup are often unavoidable. It's not always feasible to change the layout plan of an office or remove doors and walls in certain areas of the buildings. Halimbawa, kung ikaw at ang isang kasamahan mo ay nagkaroon ng isang importanteng business conversation in the lunchroom, kung saan dito ang malakas at may ingay, isang simpleng solusyon ay to move the conversation to a quieter location like in the hallway or at your desk. Next barriers is perceptual barriers to communication. While physical barriers are easily to spot, perceptual barriers are more complex. These kinds of barriers to communication take place in the mind. They include preconceived notion about the person with whom you're talking, Halimbawa dito is kung kakausapin mo ang isang kasamahan mo na sa palagay mo ay hindi sang-ayon sa mga ideas mo or hindi pinapahalagan yung mga ideas or opinions mo, you might be tempted to talk to him in a defensive or dismissive tone. Kung yung taong yon ay hindi nagtataglay ng mga damdamin tungkol sa'yo, he may be taken aback and begin to feel uncomfortable not listening to the conversation taking place. Next is the emotional barriers to communication. One of the 7 barriers of communication is emotion. Fear, vulnerability, and mistrust often take over when people are communicating due to a lack of self-confidence. One of the examples of emotional barriers are anger. Anger can affect the way your brain processes information given to you. For example, angry people have difficulty processing logical statements, limiting their ability to accept explanation and solution offered by others. Next is the cultural barriers to communication. In today's global economy, it's commonplace for employees to interact with people from all over the world. Some companies have offices in different countries, while others work with partners and resellers from different cultures. A cultural barrier in communication occurs mainly when two different cultural backgrounds. We encounter cultural barriers in everyday life. In the age of globalization and digital media, the whole world is performing and participating on one platform. Example of cultural barrier: making eye contact is considered rude and forward, while in others, it's a way to establish trust and show honesty. When dealing with peers from other cultures, it is important to conduct research beforehand to understand communication and cultural norms. Businesses that operate globally often offer training on different communication styles to enable employees to converse effectively. Next is the language barriers to communication. Communicating with people who speak different language can pose barriers as well. While English is used as the language of business in many parts of the world, other languages are also used. So dito, sinasabi na ang English ay naiiba sa American English tulad ng British English at Canadian English. So it is important to use plain English to convey the message rather than insider terms. Another example of a language barrier is dialect. People can technically be speaking the same language, but dialectical difference can create misunderstanding and gaps in communication. Next is the gender barriers to communication. The way men and women communicate varies greatly, which can lead to gender barriers in communication. Women speak double or more the number of words than men speak each day. Even in a workplace where women and men share equal stature, knowledge, and experience, differing communication styles may prevent them from working together effectively. Gender Gender barriers can be inherent or may be related to gender stereotypes and the ways in which men and women are taught to behave as children. One of the example of gender barriers is women focus on feelings, sense, and meaning. They rely on their intuition to find answer. While men focus on facts, reason, and logic, they find answer by analyzing and figuring things out. Next is interpersonal barriers to communication. Interpersonal is a kind of communication barrier that is one of the most difficult to overcome because it is largely rooted in personality. Example, if if an employee is shy and lacks the self-confidence to present to a large group of colleagues, she may need additional support in order to communicate. The company could enable her to present her findings to a smaller group rather than to entire executive team. Conversely, the company could allow her to communicate her findings in writing rather than giving a verbal speech. So now, let's move on to removing the 7 barriers of communication. So, by identifying the most common barriers experienced in the workplace and developing plans to remove the barriers, organization can ensure the employees are successfully communicating. Solution may include developing introductory communication training programs to help those with perceptual, emotional, or interpersonal barriers to overcome their challenges with communication. Other option includes offering introductory language and cultural classes to engage employees who face language and cultural barriers. Culture and international communication concept. Because culture varies so widely across the globe, understanding the differences in culture and the importance of international communication is vital to business environment. For example, in Japan, people do not like to say the word no in a business meeting. A Japanese business person may mean no, but never directly state it. This can cause confusion. Next is the etiquette and communication. Etiquette is a combination of behavior and communication. Making an error in etiquette can cause a business deal to fail. For example, when you are meeting with a group of people from the Asian culture, you have to be aware of hierarchy issues. If you disagree with an idea presented by a person in management, it is not a good idea to say no to say in front of subordinates. The manager loses face by what is perceived as criticism. Etiquette and communication are considered soft skills, but they are vitally important to the successful conduct of a business. Appropriate behavior establishes trust among business contacts, and a good flow of communication improves the efficiency of any enterprise. Next is language differences in written communication. In the Western world, business is handled by phone calls and emails. Less formal communication can cause confusion and misinterpretation due to language differences. For example, if you use generally accepted Americanized statement, you can cause a lot of confusion, such as "I'm on it," "I'll jump on that right away," or even "I get it." Other email communications need to be considered. Next is psychological barriers. Psychological barriers may include shyness or embarrassment. Sometimes a person may present herself as being abrupt or difficult when she may actually be nervous. Psychological or emotional barriers can also refer to the psychological state, opinions, attitude, status, consciousness, emotion of a person that deeply affects the ability to communicate. The communication largely depends on the mental condition of a person. If the person is not mentally or emotionally sound, then he cannot communicate effectively either as a sender or a receiver. Next is the cultural barrier. Acceptable styles of communication vary between cultures. Asking polite questions about each other's culture and expressing willingness to learn about different cultural backgrounds can foster workplace relationships. Next is Language barriers. A communication barrier may be present because the parties do not share a common language. Interpreters and translators may be used to good effect in this circumstance. To overcome or removing language barriers, the few things you can do is use plain jargon, whether you're working with someone who knows your primary language as a secondary, or you're trying to communicate a deeply technical problem to your non-technical coworkers. Everyone should get in the habit of using plain language whenever possible. The other is be careful. Language barriers can be frustrating. They require patience, understanding, and consciousness. Ensure that when you or your team are struggling to communicate, that you never raise your voice or over talk slower instead of louder, clearly instead of forcefully. The last one, environmental barriers. Environmental barriers to communication can include noise and lack of privacy. An environment which is too hot or cold will not be conducive or to effective communication. Some places of business are busy with many distractions, such as constantly ringing telephones and other messaging systems. The individual could overcome this communication barrier by moving to a quieter location to continue their conversation. This would allow them to hear each other clearly and ensure that all the information being discussed and heard by each person, therefore resolving the problem and allowing effective communication. That's all po. Thank you.